No, no buzz. Just Bees Book Club episode about The Shining by Stephen King. The third book of Stephen King's, the third one I've read since in the last couple weeks, and the third one I've read while doing this show, I guess probably. Since this is very obviously immediately after I signed off the Salem's Lot one, I'm just gonna kind of sneak a little bit back here in the top of this video. The thing I didn't mention that I meant to was that I watched the Toby Hooper miniseries adaptation of Salem's Lot and thought it was quite bad. Just not very good. I watched all 3 hours of it, but did not enjoy it very much. I thought they made some bad choices. Barlow, bad choice, I think. Reframing the epilogue and the way they did, bad choice. Uh, Not doing the Donald Callahan scene, bad choice. I get that one for TV reasons, but yeah, let's talk about The Shining. Let's talk about The Shining. The Shining is a book, correct, about a little boy named Danny Torrance, who's psychic, and his dad is an aspiring playwright and a former alcoholic who is an abusive piece of shit, and is portrayed in really true to life ways, from my experience. Um, Danny's dad has just had recently been fired for literally beating up a teenager that he taught in school for who was cutting his tires for cutting him from the debate club for stuttering. Uh, Jack has gotten a job as the caretaker of a big old hotel in Colorado. And he's bringing his family there. Wendy's the mom in this situation. She is not a particularly well drawn character. Uh, the three of them are going to stay over the winter at this hotel, where there's a lot of snow. So for the last like 2, 3 months, they're almost certainly going to be snowed in, completely cut off from the world. Jack sees it as an opportunity to continue his sobriety and to have a job that will make them hopefully financially a little bit more solvent, and to get to work on his great American play that sounds, to paraphrase what they talked about on what I believe Cameron said on Just King Things. Again, shout out to Just King Things, the inspiration behind me reading the works of Stephen King in publication order, and having much less insightful content come out about it. Uh, the play sounds absolutely miserable. um, there's one interesting thing that happens in the book around it, which is like once Jack has yeah, the way the book goes is the hotel's haunted by the uh, shady history and something even more malevolent perhaps, that inhabits it. It is sort of it's portrayed as sort of, well, I mean, they're literally at the end, it's portrayed as a giant plume of smoke that looks like a manta ray that kind of turns into a bunch of wasps. Wasps, a huge theme throughout this book. Um, uh, but more generally is a sort of, a haunting. There's ghosts of people who presumably died here. There's a whole history of shady ownership deals happening, whether that's through shell corporations or it's through direct ties with like Las Vegas mafia figures, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, that yeah, the place got bad energy, and when you introduce a psychic little boy who's 5, by the way, 5 years old, this Danny Torrance, um, to a big psychic battery, as he calls it. I don't remember who calls it that, but probably Stephen King just kind of talking. Um, because there is quite a bit of that in this book. I mean, it's very tied to this family and their character. That's almost all. I mean, this is an interesting thing in this series of things I'm doing so far, right? I've talked a lot about perspective here. Carrie, the perspective is literally like all over the map. Salem's Lot, the perspective jumps between the major characters and some side characters, but especially like blows out into just the town as a whole on occasion. Um, Shining is pretty tightly tied to its major characters. There's a couple of maybe three total chapters, maybe even just two from Dick Halloran's perspective. I'm not even gonna get into that. Not just not gonna. Yeah, no, no. Um, yeah. Uh, but yeah, like I'm trying now to just remember off the top of my head. I just read this over the last couple of days, which doesn't actually mean I have any better memory of it than if I hadn't. Um, and my brain is a sieve. Uh, I don't think you get. Yeah, there's no like Ullman chapters. Ullman is like the manager who hires Jack. There's no Al Shockley chapters. Al is like Jack's former drinking buddy who's on the board of directors for the hotel. Yeah, I think it's just tied to the core family, like the perspective. Um, but like I said with Salem's Lot, a thing that definitely struck me was the way that maybe I'm wrong to say that there's just moments of just Stephen King saying stuff. I think it's all framed through a like close third person perspective. But like with Salem's Lot, there's definitely moments where you can feel King kind of loosening his grip on the characters as um, discrete individuals and allowing himself to sort of rev the engine of plot, as it were. Um, and yeah, that I feel like the dry battery thing is kind of one of those moments, but I could be wrong. That could be something that Dick Halloran says or something like that or thinks. Um, I mean, I found this book very, very compelling. I read it in two sittings. It's almost 700 pages in this mass market that I have. And that's like genuinely cool to me because I have been very much having a hard time reading things and you know going through my own shit. Um, and yeah, it's just a compelling book start to finish, even though the stuff that you might think of from perhaps a movie by one Stanley Kubrick is like a very pretty short chunk of the novel. It's like I guess it's like 250 pages at the back half when all the ghost shit like really pops off. Um, which is like not a short amount of pages for a thing. That's like longer than a lot of books that I prefer to read at this point in my life. Um, but it is short in terms of a 700 page book, let's say. Um, in terms of structure, it's definitely more on the Salem's Lot end than the Carrie end. It seems Stephen King has abandoned his predilection for spoilers by book two, which deeply hurts me as a person. It makes me sad. Stephen King makes me sad. Just kidding. It's a bad joke. There's he's consistently doing like a certain amount of foreshadowing, but the like full blown fucking this person will be dead within the next 6 hours shit. That is just like uh, really excited me about Carrie is no longer the case here, despite the fact that one of the characters in this, who you might call the central character, Danny Torrance, a 5-year-old, is psychic, has precognitive abilities. What better structure to spoil your own book? But no, no, he's a serious author now, as he describes in the prologue, where he decided that Jack Torrance should be a complicated man who loved his abusive father, perhaps because of his abuse. Um, it's a weird. Stephen King's doing some weird sops to like literary fiction, I think, in especially Salem's Lot and The Shining that are they're weird. He's a weird guy who wrote some weird books that people really like, and I'm one of them apparently. Um, I did have like big thoughts. I kind of didn't really have big thoughts with this one. It was incredibly compelling, on a sentence by sentence, on a plot, moving forward kind of basis. Uh, the psychic stuff is like pretty well portrayed. The haunted house rules. It's one of the it's a really solid fucking haunted house. And that counts a lot to me. Um, uh, weird, weird gay panic stuff in this one. Kind of, kind of like really consistently. um, Not gay panic exclusively. I think that comes in a couple times, but there's a definite, yeah, there's a definite awkwardness about sexuality and masculinity. I think, I mean, I yeah, I didn't like pick out any pages or anything like that, but I think the I think the portrayal of Jack was like really strong for me in certain directions. I think the depiction of his struggles with alcoholism is like cartoonish in certain aspects, um, but really resonant in others. And I think his way of his sort of masculinity, although I don't know that King would necessarily think of this as as an aspect of masculinity, although he does sort of couch it in the sort of intergenerational abuse aspect that this book is very interested in. But like one of the most strongly, I guess, relatable things, and that this is a thing I have seen in the world, is his like he has this like he has this persecution complex is basically what it boils down to. Um, but and I don't think that's like a fascinating character decision or whatever. But I do think that he repeatedly, the king repeatedly, when in Jack's perspective, um, does a good job of sort of laying out the like threads of argumentation that Jack would have with himself in order to absolve himself of any wrongdoing in a situation. The biggest one of this is there's an incident when Jack is still an alcoholic where he finds Danny having like thrown all of his papers all around the room and accidentally spilled beer on them, where he breaks Danny's arm, like wrenching him over to spank him. And it comes up multiple times throughout the book that there's this big like tension between Jack and Wendy, which Danny actually does not take part in at all. Danny's response to it is just like, "Oh yeah, that was a thing that happened a long time ago," basically like consistently throughout the book. But anytime that like Jack feels like Wendy is trying to take his son away, he immediately brings up the broken arm thing, and he doesn't bring it up as like a here's I'm sorry. He brings it up as a you will just never let this die, will you? Um, this is presumably less than 2 years prior, because again, Danny Torrance is 5 years old, and he was not portrayed as an infant during this situation. I think they say he was barely a year out of diapers, and then at another point they say he's barely 2 or 3 years out of diapers. Later, like referring to the current moment of the book. Um, that's the way it sort of like foregrounds multiple times throughout the book. But I think specifically the writing where Jack will be going through um, like the process of seeming to or like starting to confront the fact that he has fucked something up, and then the way he sort of wriggles himself out of it is a thing I have experienced with certain older men in my life, let's say, and sort of leave it at that. Um, Even down to the way that he, at a couple of points, breaks down into tears, sobbing, seeming to have finally had a breakthrough and acknowledged that, uh, or start to acknowledge that he has actually caused harm in this world, only to have him immediately backpedal once it is suggested to him that the reason he's crying is because he did something wrong and not, because he just uh, is being a manipulative piece of shit. There may have been some things in this book that really resonated with personal things, and yeah, and that's doubled back in on uh, in his perspective stuff also with the alcoholism. I think the fact that he always wipes his lips with his handkerchief when he's needs to get a drink is a really fucking corny um, thing that just keeps happening constantly throughout. It feels very much like an affectation on King's part, like he's trying to do some like Raymond Chandler shit or something like that. I'm not really sure like where he would have picked it up, but like um yeah, it just feels corny. And I guess it's like tied into the fact that he's clearly thinking of this filmically and in the way that he describes a lot of the stuff. But like it's falling on Salem's Lot. That's very obvious. But yeah, it's oh, also, despite the thumbnail, I'm never going to get to a point where I'm like, and this is the part that scared me very bad. Just don't really. Horror stuff doesn't really scare me. So let's take that uh, as you will, me, because I'm B, and this is a Just B's book club. Anyway, yeah, I think that was the big point I did want to hit, and the smaller ones that preceded it. So that means it is time for me to say you should be listening to Just King Things and not this because this is just for bees. And that's why I'm going to say thank you for not watching.